Texas A&M is holding 19 dogs, even though their own records show it's not using it for muscular dystrophy experiments. Free the 19 at Texas A&M. Lab dogs deserve a life. Next on the PETA Podcast. Welcome to the PETA Podcast. I'm Guillermo, your host for this inside look at animal rights, brought to you by PETA, the largest animal rights organization in the world. On today's episode, Texas A&M's dog research on Duchenne muscular dystrophy was a 40-year exercise in futility. Dozens of dogs, some bred at the university for the research, were cruelly used in experiments. It had to stop. Then in 2019, after PETA's protests, with the help of the public outcry, including 500 physicians, the university agreed it would stop breeding dogs. But the university has resisted PETA's offer to adopt all the remaining dogs at A&M and refuses to set the last 19 dogs free. One problem is the university has never told the truth about what it's doing with the 19 dogs, even telling a legislator that all 19 were sick, when 12 are healthy and could be easily adopted immediately. Even the 7 who are sick deserve a real home and not a cage. Here's my conversation with PETA Senior VP Kathy Guilliermo, head of the Laboratory Investigations Department, on the truth about the muscular dystrophy dogs at Texas A&M. Texas A&M is lying to the public. Yeah, that's clear. To the government and even to Texas state legislators about what they're doing with the dogs in the university's canine muscular dystrophy laboratories. Now, our regular listeners are familiar with the canine muscular dystrophy dogs at Texas A&M. But for those who are new to the podcast and to the issue, tell us the situation there. Texas A&M is lying to the public?
They have actually been regularly lying to the public, but they've taken a new turn in their defense of the use of these dogs. Just to give you a little bit of background, we first uncovered what they call the Duchenne muscular dystrophy canine dog model back at the end of 2016. At that point, somebody who had worked in the laboratory where they had nearly 100, mostly golden retrievers, also some German short-haired pointers. Somebody who worked in that laboratory sent us a video because this person was so upset by the condition of these dogs. And we saw mostly golden retrievers who were afflicted with the canine form of this terrible human disease, who could barely hobble around their metal runs. They could only eat a very thin oatmeal gruel-like substance because their tongues were swollen and they couldn't swallow very effectively. They were clearly uncomfortable. They had no real lives. And then the other dogs who weren't sick, but who were used for breeding to carry on these genes, were just going crazy from being stuck in these runs. They were standing up on their hind legs and stereotypically walking back and forth. So this is what we uncovered back in the late 2016. Wow. And this was what we released to the public after speaking with a number of scientists.
Yeah. So that was for 2016. That's 5 years ago. And it's still going on?
Well, we have largely won this campaign, which we'll get to.
Has the lab work they've done at Texas A&M, the experiments, has any of that helped any human beings?
It hasn't. That's the real issue here as far as the public and those people who are afflicted with muscular dystrophy. This is what they should be really concerned about. We're opposed to the use of animals for any reason for experimentation. But when you've got a situation where dogs have been bred to suffer in this way for 40 years, and they've had no real progress on treatments or cures for muscular dystrophy, why is it still going on? And that's the message that we took to the university and the public. We got 500 physicians to take a look at this, and they agreed with us. And 100 of those doctors treat patients with MD. All of them said this isn't going to help people. People with muscular dystrophy have joined this effort. So it's really time for it all to end now.
And so this has been an ongoing thing. You've pretty much won, but you haven't really won. Tell me about the progress in closing this lab down at Texas A&M.
Well, really, you're right. We have won this. In 2019, under this immense pressure from our campaign, from the celebrities who joined us, from the doctors, from the people with MD, they announced an end to the breeding of these dogs. And that was really the beginning of the end for this laboratory. That was a signal to us that we had won. They made dozens of these dogs available for adoption. We are down now from that original 100 dogs to 19 dogs.
Why have they been hanging on to the dogs? Why won't they release all the dogs if you've won the case? Why won't they just let them go?
I think there are two reasons. Number one is I think they simply don't want to admit defeat. Under pressure, they had to stop breeding them. They don't have, as far as we can tell, any funding for experimentation with these dogs. The records we've uncovered from the university show that these dogs are not being used in experimental procedures. So there's no real excuse for keeping them other than they don't want to give in entirely. The other thing is they're insisting that these dogs go to the homes of people who support animal experimentation, which is absurd. The dogs need homes. People are willing to take them. PETA's offered to take all of the dogs throughout this whole effort, and we could easily take the last 19 and find good homes for every one of them.
So you're saying there's a kind of the obstacle is in the pride of Texas A&M. They won't, with people out there willing to take them, especially PETA, they won't release these 19 dogs because of their pride?
That's what it appears to be, that they are just hanging on to this, clinging to this last vestige that somehow scientifically this was important, simply to keep somebody, in this case PETA, from winning a campaign.
And tell me about the 19 dogs. Are they sick? Where they're in the labs? Where are they being kept? And are they being taken care of while they're under control of Texas A&M?
Of these 19 dogs, 12 of them are perfectly healthy. 12 are not afflicted with the disease. Most of those dogs are carriers. There's one who is not a carrier and is just perfectly healthy. Every one of those 12 could easily go to a good home for somebody who wants a golden retriever or a German short-haired pointer right now. I tried to adopt 2 of them, but because I oppose animal experimentation, I was denied. Only 7 of the dogs are afflicted with canine muscular dystrophy. Now, here is the crazy part. 12 of these dogs have been, let me make sure I've got my numbers right. So there are 12 who are perfectly healthy. 7 are sick. 10 of the dogs are in the muscular dystrophy laboratory still. And the others have been sent to the veterinary school for students who are learning to become veterinarians. They're not even in the same laboratory that they started out in. So why are they hanging on to those dogs? That's the question we have.
So they actually vet people before they give dogs. They ask you where your stand is, and can't people just refuse to answer that and then get the dogs?
No, because the university, although it's a public university, if the university were running the adoption program, you're right, that's what they would have to do as a state institution. But they work with an adoption organization that is supported by animal experimenters, so they get to call the terms.
Wow. So they essentially block adoptions for these dogs. And are the dogs are the dogs suffering?
I think if you had to spend your life living in a kennel, yes, I would call that suffering. Yes. They have, according to their records, an exercise period maybe once a week for 40 minutes or once every 2 weeks. And that's it. That's when they get out. The dogs who are in the veterinary school are used for procedures. We don't think the procedures are invasive. We don't think it's surgery. We think it's more like examinations, that kind of thing, but we don't know for certain. But again, these are mostly healthy dogs who could go to good homes right now.
All right. We began by saying that Texas A&M is lying to the public, continues to lie to the public. What is Texas A&M saying that is false?
They've lied most recently And I say most recently because they have a long history of lying to the public. For the first 3 years of our effort, they lied about breeding the dogs. They said they weren't breeding the dogs to develop the disease. And under pressure from reporters, they had to admit they were. So that was the first big lie that they told. The man who heads the laboratory right now is a man named Peter Neum, and he took over for the one who was in charge when we first launched our campaign. And Peter Neum said recently in December at a public meeting, a government meeting attended by scientists and government officials, that when he was done with the dogs in the laboratory, they were made available for adoption. This is obviously untrue because 9 of them are now in the veterinary school. They're not even in the muscular dystrophy laboratory. So that was a lie, number one. The second thing that happened is that there were some legislators in Texas who are very concerned about this situation and why these dogs are being held. And one of them called Texas A&M to say, why are you hanging on to these 19 dogs? And this person says that he was told that all the dogs were very sick and required round-the-clock care, so they couldn't be placed in homes. Well, big lie number 2, we know that only 7 of the dogs are sick. So this is a university that is willing to lie to the public and willing to keep healthy dogs caged rather than allow PETA to say, look, the laboratory's closed, we won.
And once again, why would they do this? Simply to spite PETA and the animal rights effort to free these dogs in the first place? Is that enough?
I think they're getting very bad advice from people who don't know what they're doing. We would praise the university for letting these dogs go. We praise them for ending the breeding that signaled the end of this program to begin with. And we would thank them and praise them for releasing these dogs. So I think they're getting bad advice from people outside of their own university community who are afraid of where the world of animal experimentation is going, namely down the toilet.
And I guess that's your theory of trying to figure out why they're acting the way they are in this bizarre way of, after ending the breeding, they hold on to these dogs. Is that it? This theory that PETA has?
Well, that's the best I've been able to come up with. And since 2017, we have written multiple times to officials. Most recently, I wrote twice to the new president of Texas A&M, President Banks, and I asked her, number one, release the dogs. Will you release the dogs? And number 2, will you engage with us? Nobody from Texas A&M has ever engaged directly with us. Not in all these years have they engaged with us. Every public statement they have made has been to the media, not to PETA. So that's very interesting, first of all. I got read receipts on both of those emails, and yet not a word from the president.
And why would they not want to engage? Is that so much a sign of weakness or so much a sign that things are changing that they just can't see that happening? It sounds like PETA is not being really, and I don't know, aggressive really isn't the right word, but they're trying to engage. PETA's trying to engage in order to get these dogs out, in order for the good science to prevail and not the bad, and doing it for the benefit of the animals. And Texas A&M doesn't seem to get that.
This has become a turf war for the animal experimentation community. Let's look at the evidence. We know that 95% of all new medications that are developed in animals that appear to be safe and effective in animals fail when they're tried in humans. They have a 95% failure rate. The effort to develop treatments for muscular dystrophy using dogs and other animals has largely been a failure. There are a couple of treatments that are in clinical trials now that have been fraught with issues and problems that the humans who are part of the studies have had negative side effects or negative reactions to them. So we have an industry of animal experimentation that is enormous, a multi-billion-dollar industry that is failing to help human beings. So they are now clinging to everything. They're not rejecting the obviously foolish and stupid experiments on animals because they're so afraid that they're losing this battle. And I think that's what's going on here.
All right. So say if the fantasy happens and Texas A&M comes to their senses and say, here, have the dogs, and thank you very much. And then what happens? Are they somehow open to the kind of fears that they had, or what would happen if they gave you the dogs?
The dogs would have a chance at a real life. We would thank Texas A&M. We would praise the university. The dogs would get some semblance of normality and family love for the years that they have left. That is the total upshot. That is what would happen. This doesn't say anything about the larger issue. This is about 19 dogs still at Texas A&M University. We have a different way of dealing with the larger issue, and that doesn't involve Texas A&M so much as it involves our legislators.
Yet at the same time, they'll say, okay, here are the dogs, but then they're prepared for a full-on onslaught in the way they do business as a research institution. Is that correct? I mean, is that a correct assumption on their part that would happen?
It's coming to the research world in general because people are upset by the fact that so many billions of dollars every year is being poured into basic research, most of which involves animals, and 90% of which fails to yield treatments and cures for humans. So this battle is coming anyway. It's not going to happen on the Texas A&M campus. It's going to happen in the halls of Congress and at the National Institutes of Health. As far as Texas A&M goes, the dogs will find a home. We'll stop campaigning against them. It's that simple.
And the public, there have been people who have claimed that they've benefited from the research, and Texas A&M has put out people there saying, we need this. Were they all duped by, Texas A&M, or is there hope in any of that kind of research?
The hope is going to come from the more modern methods of research that have applicability to human beings. The problem with the animal experimentation is that while we share so much with animals, we have this capacity for love and for friendship and for empathy and for suffering and for joy, which anybody who has a dog has witnessed. What we have that is very different, however, is our physiologies. We just don't operate in the same way. I mean, if you look at the National Institutes of Health and the work that they have done around human studies, clinical studies, they've acknowledged the difference between how a man might be affected by a treatment and how a woman might be. So there are differences within our own species depending on what gender we are, where we come from, what our age is. Imagine how far removed we are from the dog physiologically. And NIH itself and the National Academy of Sciences has acknowledged that our closest relatives, the chimpanzees, have not been useful in finding cures and treatments for humans. And so that experimentation was stopped. How much farther away from the chimpanzee is the dog or the mouse or the rabbit or the horse or any of the other animals now used in laboratories? And that's our point. Have we ever benefited from the use of animals in the past? Undoubtedly, we've learned something, but that doesn't mean that we need to keep doing it the same way any more than we need to rely on the telegraph to communicate with somebody across the country.
Are you close? I mean, where are you at this stage? Texas A&M lies. PETA's asked for the dogs. Where are we today? And what's the best hope in terms of moving forward?
Well, we're sticking around until we get those dogs out. We could have declared victory in 2019. The handwriting was on the wall when they stopped breeding, but we cared about those individual dogs and we still care about them. So we're not going away. And what we need our listeners to do, if they would please, is to go to the PETA website and look at the information on Texas A&M. There's an email campaign. There are ways to call the university and simply say, I'm in favor of releasing those 19 dogs. I support good research, but let those dogs go. And the help from the public would be tremendous. We've had a number of celebrities help us, and that's always wonderful. But there's nothing like taxpaying Americans to call up a public university, especially if you're in Texas, and say enough is enough.
So listeners should just go to the PETA website. The Texas A&M folks, would they listen to an onslaught of emails saying release the dogs?
That's the wonderful thing. There's always somebody at any facility where we send emails who count them and worry about them. At this point, more than 500,000 people have contacted the university, and there are always people worried about that. So I don't want listeners to think that their voice is lost in the crowd. Every single voice is so important. And if you sign up for action alerts and text notifications, you'll get very simple messages about how to take action on a variety of campaigns, including this one.
And as you pointed out, even though PETA has won the case to end the breeding in 2019, it is still not over until every last dog is out, and every last dog is not out. It's been 2 years.
Yes, since the breeding stopped, it's been 2 years. And each of these dogs has a name. I mean, if it's difficult to think of an individual as just a dog in a laboratory, there are dogs there named Juniper and Maple and Pee-wee and Scrump. And we read the records on these dogs when we get our public records requests fulfilled. And we see the dogs whose appetite has decreased. Why? Are they depressed? We see them getting outside to a little yard maybe once every 2 weeks. Once every 2 weeks. I mean, can you imagine living in, and I think after the pandemic, we all have some sense of what it is to be confined to a space and how that made us long for the company of others and long to be with our families if we were separated from them. So each one of these dogs is somebody. Each one of them is a being who needs a home and a family.
PETA Senior VP Kathy Guilliermo on the Texas A&M Canine Muscular Dystrophy Laboratory and the ongoing saga of the 19 dogs that must be freed. Go to PETA.org and take action. And that's our show for today. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to send a link of this show to your friends. Tell them that you like the PETA Podcast. Contact us at PETA.org. You can find me on Twitter at EmilAmok. That's EMILAMOK. Or see my vlog at AMOK.com. Or see my work at ALDEF, the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund. That's at ALDEF, AALDEF.org/blog. Once again, thank you for listening. Check out all our episodes on your favorite podcast app or on Apple Podcasts, where you can subscribe to us as well as rate and review the show. It helps get the word out about the issues you care about. Our music is provided by Carbonworks. Check them out on YouTube. And as a final point of disclosure, Kathy Guilliermo is my spouse. Join us again next time for more insight into animal rights and the fight for a cruelty-free world on the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo.